Looks fair to me.
Yes, he did.
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
June is busting out all over. Our first episode for June, 2 weeks away from Donny Bash. More details about that later. But first, let's meet the panelists. Starting with Wendy Wiese of the Jennifer and Wendy Show on the Big 550 KTRS. Bill McClellan, columnist with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Ray Hartmann from Ray Hartmann's St. Louis Insider, which we can find on Substack. And editor and columnist with the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid. Hey, little program note halfway through, Wesley Bell, St. Louis County prosecuting attorney, will join us on Next Up. Bill and Wendy with the questions. Hope you tune in. Hey, Wendy, I want to ask you about some big news from the St. Louis Archdiocese, but maybe not as big as some people expected, because at one point it was suggested that maybe half of the Archdiocese's 178 parishes would be closed. Instead, it turns out, what, 35 are being closed, another 15 are being consolidated. Is this really big news for the region or only for Catholics?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I think it's big, certainly big news for Catholics. It's certainly big news for the Catholic Church. It's not surprising because they rolled this idea of all things new out a couple of years ago. So people have been expecting it. What to expect was obviously the mystery. But it is, while it is incredibly sad for the people whose parishes have been impacted, and for the people whose, just the idea of a neighborhood parish has been impacted. Archbishop Rosansky said that for the first time since the 1960s, the number of Catholics has dipped below 500,000. And the Archdiocese of St. Louis has always been one of the largest archdioceses in the country. So it's sort of just the reality of the situation. Something has to change, and this is how they have chosen to do it. I know that doesn't bring any comfort at all to the people who are saddened by a lifelong affiliation ending, but you just hope that things are resolved in a suitable way and a comfortable way for everybody.
As a non-Catholic, and in fact as an Orangeman, I think that it's really big news, the decline of the church in the city and in the county, in that the church has been such a part of the fabric of St. Louis, and the Catholic schools have been so important, that the decline of the church is a big story, I think.
Oh, it definitely is. But you look at smaller families. Look at how much the church has changed, and not just in St. Louis, everywhere. All denominations are seeing these types of numbers, and I think erosion in the number of members. But when he said that statistically we should be seeing some kind of movement because we're having more births and fewer funerals. But he said that's not happening.
Well, at one point, the St. Louis Archdiocese encompassed 17 states. I mean, it was a huge thing.
Amazing.
Times have changed, but the one thing that kind of concerns me is the outreach, because a lot of these parishes do a lot of good work in the community among the poor and others.
Yeah.
And it's a social spot, whether it's the St. Peter's for the, the Spring Fest or the fish fries. And there was a Harvard professor who wrote a book on how we're all kind of fragmented now. We're all bowling alone. And to some extent, these churches brought people together.
Well, you also take out the Rock Church, St. Alphonsus, and it's right down the street from us. And I'm just hard-pressed to close any church in an area where most of the people who live around it are I won't say poor, but just are not on the higher end of the economic scale. They actually are providing an anchor in that community that you're taking away. What is going to happen to that marvelous church and that marvelous building right there? I mean, just what's going to happen just to that little part of like near North St. Louis? And if there's no answer, then that's really sad.
If I had a business school, I would have a course on the Catholic Church, that this is the longest standing business I can imagine, over 2,000 years old, and it just keeps chugging along. So, you know, I think that the church will find a way forward.
Well, let me ask you, Bill, while we have you, while you have the microphone, I want to ask you about a couple of vetoes by the county executive, Sam Page, this week. One was the bill that we talked about a little bit earlier that would have prohibited people from walking on county roads in unincorporated St. Louis County if there's a sidewalk. He vetoed that. And then the other was a bill that would have reversed some of the restrictions on selling cigarettes near daycare centers and schools. How'd you feel about those?
I thought Sam Page was incorrect on both. I had, you know, the not walking on the streets was really an effort to stop the people who solicit between cars and then
with children.
Yeah,
sometimes.
And I'm against that. And I think that's dangerous. And they threw in the like jogging, just to make it seem like they weren't picking on one group. And I was delighted. I thought, do something about these joggers on the streets. Good idea. And as far as the cigarettes go, I think if you have a convenience store and one of your big items is cigarettes, you shouldn't be restricted just because you're near a school or a daycare center. If kids are going to smoke, they're going to smoke. I mean, regardless of whether the nearby convenience store has cigarettes.
I agree. You're hurting the merchants.
Yeah.
You're hurting the merchants. The children from the daycare are not going to be coming into the convenience store to buy cigarettes. The children from the schools are not. I mean, do we really want to? Do we want to set the bar that high? We can't have cigarettes in the vicinity. What about the parents who pick up carpool with cigarettes in their ashtray or their, you know, their console?
If there's an ordinance that says you cannot sell cigarettes within this distance from any school, then I think we should all back that up. I mean, I don't think that.
Oh my gosh!
Just,
it's not a strip club, though. I mean, these are just cigarettes.
Cigarettes are
and by the way, and they
They're
are
a lot more
killers.
dangerous than a strip
They are
club.
killers, and the number of smokers continues to decline.
So let's keep it declining.
Oh my God!
Wait, can I? Oops, okay.
No, I just don't see that.
Oh, you can't speak.
Okay, well, that's apparently my popular demand. No, I would say my fellow founder's half right, although I have to, because I think Sam Page was right to veto the bill that would target people. First of all, there's already an ordinance. I think Tim Fitch actually tweeted, there's already an ordinance on the books that says you got to walk on the sidewalk when you can. So, but the bill itself was terribly written, and if they want to specifically target people who are coming up to cars in an era of carjacking, that's one thing.
But they can't. I mean, Billy Shock
right.
went to court.
No, I know.
And
but
said
they
you can't do that.
Okay, well, and then they have the right. Then you can't. You have to respect the law, and you certainly, the message it was sent to disabled people, it was terrible. It was just a bad idea. On the other side, on the cigarette thing, and I'm big on raising tobacco taxes and a lot of other things to reduce smoking as best we can. If somebody owns a business now and a convenience store, it is grossly unfair to them to come along when they've been operating it and their tobacco license is a big part of their asset, and basically I don't think it would hold up in court. The idea that you could just take the value of their business away wantonly, and again, the whole idea is this isn't about people selling heroin on playgrounds. 1,000 feet is 3 blocks. I mean, it's not that close. And let me ask you this: you think? I'll bet you there's schnooks and Durbergs out there that are within 1,000 feet of a school or daycare.
Well, then we'll see.
Let's see them enforce
going
it
back to that, I just think that there's all kind of businesses where somebody has held a license, and they said, like, when you are no longer the owner of this business, whoever buys it, will not be able to sell XYZ, or you can't smelt here anymore.
No,
Alvin is
on your junkyard.
Alvin is,
but we're done
case,
with the smelter on here.
Alvin, you're right. You know, the Post-Dispatch.
Oh, thank you, Judge Brennan. I don't think so.
I'm
Judge
ruling in
thinks it's
favor
fine to
of
this.
the representative from Kirkwood.
Thank you.
Here's what happened, Ray. There were 4 businesses that went in front of the county council, and they made your plea. And then the health director for the county, who was only relying on facts, she noticed that those businesses had like 14 violations of selling to minors in the last 2 years. And the point is, these businesses are selling to minors, and if you keep them further away from a school especially, I agree with you, Wendy. I don't think too many kids in preschool are buying cigarettes legally or smoking. I don't see it too often.
So you think people...
But, you know, you get on the right side of history, Ray. Smoking...
I haven't getting on the wrong side of history.
If a kid wants to smoke, cigarettes are legal. The kid is going to...
Not for kids.
Well, that's a good point.
Okay. Alvin, Reid, try to move on.
Why don't you keep them here?
I'm sorry. Bring it up with Wesley Bell.
When I say legal, I mean they're available for purchase.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
Alvin, I want to ask you about Thomas Abt. He's the author of Bleeding Out and a 2019 story, a book rather, about focused deterrence, which is a way he believes violent crime can be reduced in cities. And he says it's been done in Boston and Oakland and elsewhere. So this past week, the East-West Gateway Council of Governments voted unanimously to start negotiating with him to bring his program to St. Louis. This is just a couple of years after we went with another program called Cure Violence out of Chicago. So what do you think about the regional leaders deciding to go with another plan to fight crime?
Well, while they're negotiating, I hope they figure out a really low price for this. My biggest problem is he was at this crime summit and made a presentation. That's point A. Now he's about to get hired. And when you go from point A directly to point B, and point B is somebody getting paid, that troubles me. That just never sits right with me. What, is he the only person in the world that could do this? Did we check anyplace else? Why him? Why now? What is this amount of money? I don't know. That just doesn't sit tight.
Well, he's got credentials. He worked for, I believe, the Obama Justice Department.
And
he was
I got
a Harvard professor.
I made a presentation. We talked about the presentation last week, and so
now he's
literally
hired.
12 days ago, and 12 days
to transform.
later.
Let's not delay. I mean, crime's a problem.
This is, first of all, this is our...
But Cure Violence was going to be the solution. I'm sorry, Ray.
No, knock yourself out. This guy, I'm sure he's a fine guy, and this is great. You know, this is our civic inferiority complex again, going to an out-of-town expert.
Exactly.
Cure Violence, he's apparently, best I can tell, a competitor to Cure Violence, or has a competitive view of the same stuff. If his stuff is so good, all we got to do is find a city that is using it and send a delegation to that city.
Ray,
My point is this,
there was a problem with Cure Violence because one of the Cure Violence employees was arrested for covering up a murder.
Terrific.
I mean, we had to go with another direction.
God, Charlie, you're just too harsh, man.
Yeah, the bottom line is, I don't care which. The thing is this, and the story. The big thing with the crime summit, and Bill got all mad at me because they have a very fine reporter.
I just thought you were unfair to Jacob.
Jacob Barter's he's a good reporter. I noted, and I still think it's ridiculous that the Post-Dispatch didn't point out that the media was kicked out of a crime summit.
Tony Messenger was there, so you had a column, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, and a reporter.
The news story,
Both
in
are
my
supposed to
opinion,
write the
I
same
think the
thing?
news story should point out that this was secret from the public. And by the way, rank-and-file police officers weren't invited either. That's just the brass.
I do agree with you on that.
And so my point is that it was a joke of a crime summit to start with, and for a few hours, it was predicted in that story accurately that it was a, what did he call it?
Audition.
An audition. And the point is, the guy may be fine, but we have got to get over ourselves with this idea that we always got to go to an out-of-town expert.
Just the opposite. We have to
need
bring in out-of-town experts.
No, we don't.
Because it's not working locally. Have you noticed?
But
We do not need an
Cure
out-of-town
Violence also did not work locally, correct?
Yeah, it was out of Chicago.
But that's what I'm
it didn't
saying.
work in Chicago.
It didn't work in Chicago.
That's the
It didn't
thing.
work here.
What is this?
But
You
now
think it's a
by that,
Coca-Cola formula?
so you're
I
saying
would rather have privatized police.
I
I
want
would rather
Reid
have
McClellan to do
privatized
it.
security firms come in here, frankly,
Yeah,
I would-
than just keep continuing this cycle of we keep trying to do the same thing, get
All
the
right.
same results.
I did have a better idea for someplace else. All right. I think it is a good idea that the police chief we have doesn't know anything about Salem.
Amen.
All right.
That's
and
I
I'm not
agree.
right.
I agree.
But he, by
And
definition,
when
he
was the
doesn't.
last time regional leaders voted unanimously on anything?
Well, that's also a
But
concern
Steve
of mine,
Ellman-
too. You know, like,
Steve
tell
Ellman-
them the boss.
Steve
Well,
Ellman was
okay,
not.
right.
Say this,
Only-
Mr.
no,
Tracy.
we got to move on
Well,
because
but
we
I
have
mean,
no
if
time.
Tracy, I've heard nothing but good things about
it
him.
was a throwaway line,
What do you think? It's a 90-minute
No, I'm
show.
saying-
I mean, it was
Let's
a
move on.
throwaway line.
Maybe
Okay,
hold it.
now, you,
Yeah.
friend of Bob O'Loughlin,
Right.
one of the top hotel operators in town. He
Right.
came out last week in a column, I think Jacob Kern's story in the
Right.
Business Journal. O'Loughlin, who runs a bunch of hotels, says we need more police in downtown St. Louis. And he also says we need to reform the gun laws. Nick Desideri, who's a spokesperson for City Hall, said, well, maybe he can spend some money on public safety, perhaps not knowing that O'Loughlin spent more than $1 million on lights in downtown St. Louis. And he also said, well, maybe he can also help reduce poverty around St. Louis. Was that a little bit flip and snarky on behalf of City Hall?
First of all, Bob in this story, and Bob is, in my mind, no question, I was on the Tourism Commission with him 40 years ago, and he's one of the, I think he's unparalleled as an entrepreneurial success in this town. So I always think we ought to listen to what he, at least listen to him, and his politics and mine are very different, but I'll say this, and so he's every right to say what he said about downtown, and it's one of the constituencies needs to be listened to along with the condo owners, but as far as Nick Desideri, he made a point that, he's a very accessible spokesperson. He's a really good one, and he just made a kind of a throwaway about, well, if he wants to, maybe he ought to be helping us in North downtown. I don't really agree with him substantively, but I don't think it was a big deal.
You know what, Ray?
I don't think it's a big deal.
What? I just don't see that poking the bear who is responsible for a large part of this region's economic engine, poking him and saying essentially that by investing in downtown St. Louis, in terms of Union Station, the Wheel, the Aquarium, you haven't done enough, because that's how that read to this person and a lot of other people who read it. That is lowbrow, and it cannot happen because Bob O'Loughlin might be out there disassembling the Wheel before we know it and moving it out to Westport, and I think a lot of people would be okay with that.
All right, well, I'll stand alone here. I'm just kind of like, all right, appreciate everything you've done, okay? But if I come at you, you come at me and I come back at you, I don't like the argument, look what all I've done for St. Louis. Well, okay, man, it ain't free. You're making some money off your investment. You could probably make more. I understand that.
Not if people are afraid of...
But I hear you, but at the same time, I'm not going to be lectured to by people who have money invested in downtown St. Louis because they've been right along with everybody else when the whole place went to hell. So, I mean, I just kind of God bless them all.
Are you inferring that we've climbed our way out of...
No, but
what I'm
it's no
saying
big deal
is
for a
we have all been in the same arc as it just listed or whatever. And I don't think anybody gets it right.
But it's not just Union Station, the Aquarium, and the Wheel. It's Ballpark Hilton.
It's
Hilton. Cheshire Inn.
Yeah,
I mean, the guy's
this was a huge misstep,
And Nick is a good spokesperson, and he returns phone calls, but he's new to the area, and this is a man of some substance saying, we need more police, we need law and order. I mean, I didn't think that was out of line, outlandish.
What I'm saying is
you mean
that...
what O'Loughlin said was...
What I'm saying is, I got all due respect, but this coming back at Nick with, how dare you? I don't buy it.
First of all, if he is Bob O'Loughlin didn't, we are.
No, that's what I'm saying. The reaction is such that I don't think anybody should say like, oh, how dare you talk to him like that? I'd say like, no, you can say anything you want to
I'm with
him
Alvin
and
on
let him
that point.
fight his own
And
battle.
I think you can have both at the same time. I do not think it was a particularly great thing for him to say.
Thank you.
But to Alvin's point, so what? Everybody be grown-ups about this. You say it in the public
sector. We just don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of people clamoring. To get downtown right now. And so to have somebody, and I'm sorry to have you guys say he always returns his phone calls. That's his job.
I agree.
That's his job.
I agree.
I
So, I
didn't
mean,
say that. I just,
I'm the one that said that, but I will say this: the idea, and I always hate this. Oh, if we criticize Bob Waffle, he's going to leave town, or Andy Taylor. You know, these are big boys. They say things in public. If someone wants to respond, fine.
That's
It's
okay.
not-
Okay.
And nobody's saying that. I mean,
Okay.
nobody's saying.
Wendy could have said he was
okay.
gonna
Here's what we're going to do
I
now.
said- I
We're going to talk
said-
about a couple of failures on the part of government, Bill, in my view. One would be the state last year got federal money. It administers the food stamp program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and it got about $240 million to give to 600,000 kids last summer. To date, it hasn't given a dollar out in that program. It's the only state in the union to be in that category. But then closer to home, in the city of St. Louis, it was 1 year ago today that they approved $37 million for the Commercial Corridor Grants Program. North St. Louis, let's fix up West Florissant and Martin Luther King and some other streets. It turns out that $37 million program is a $0 million program because not one penny of that has been spent yet.
Well, let's go first to the state. I don't think we have any hungry children. I mean, you know, everything is up to date in Missouri. We're doing fine. I can't understand why they haven't spent that money. As far as the city, you know, that's a little bit more difficult because you can't spend everything right away. I mean, I think that you can't be too down on the mayor for not spending it as soon as she gets it. But the state, I don't know why they didn't spend the food.
I know why the state-
Well, apparently
state
there's some sort of a data.
The state is being run by people who don't believe in government. I mean, that's the answer there. As far as the city goes, you know, the only thing worse than not spending it is spending it hastily and in a careless manner. And so I think you got to give the administration a certain amount of, as you're saying,
You
a
also
certain
went through the process of going from 28 alder people to 14.
That's true.
Yeah.
And that, I think that held that whole thing up because
Right.
it has to now, and what was that? They were just sworn in literally.
That was weeks ago.
Weeks ago.
Yeah.
But
not that, I just think that now let's get it done and let's try
it's
to
a
get it
fair
done pretty
question,
quickly.
yes.
But I really do think that was on hold until you got your 14.
Well,
staff.
it's administered by the SLDC, not the alderman, although the original legislation said you had to have the alderman sign off on it. And then when Reid and others were convicted of bribery, people said, well, maybe we shouldn't have the alderman signing off on it.
And I still think that was all still shaking out. I think at least 6 months, just you couldn't do anything. You were
But
locked.
they have been taking applications, and hundreds have come in, and not a dollar's gone out. I mean, it just...
Well, they actually probably review the applications now.
Yeah. I mean, they want to do
which they
this
didn't do when
intentionally
Louis Reed
with some forethought.
Here's what I think. Well, first of all, you know, at the state level, it's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education which hasn't got the ball rolling here because they're actually administering this summer lunch benefit.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we just don't have a data collection portal.
Right.
Well, let's make one.
Well,
like every other state in the union.
But I do think the state, and I think they have been affected like everybody else in terms of manpower. I mean, the employees, they're down too.
I just don't think anything in
think
government works around here.
I think you're
I
right.
think that's. By the way, I do think it's a very fair question to ask, and for the media to stay on. But and maybe I have a double standard because it's whatever. But the state, to me, a social services related program is just not going to be given a great deal of urgency by this particular state government.
Hey, we have 2 minutes to go. Bill, let me go to you on this one, and I'll try and summarize this as quickly as possible. But there is an organization that's based in St. Petersburg and in St. Louis. It's called the African People's Socialist Party. One of their affiliated groups is the African People's Education and Defense Fund, which has just been allowed to buy some property from the city of St. Louis's LRA. Well, as it turns out, the chairman of the organization, whose name is Omale Yeshitele, he has been indicted on being an illegal Russian agent, illegal foreign agent. In other words, according to the Justice Department, he's a part of some effort to sow dissent and spread propaganda, interfere in elections. Do you think that we should be selling property to this organization?
Yeah, sure I do. I think if they got a plan to do something, and they're talking about doing something in North St. Louis, I say sure, let them try. I mean, this has nothing to do with their sowing dissent and trying to spread.
TikTok apparently is
Russian-
doing
Yeah,
that all the
yeah,
time,
it's
according to
okay.
Josh Hawley.
I don't have a problem.
Describe him as a Russian agent sounds like he's part of the Trump campaign.
Well, that's the whole point. Everyone was upset when Trump allegedly was colluding, but now this guy's colluding. Literally, I mean, at least that's what the Justice
But you may be
Department
stepping
says.
on the toes of the Trump campaign by attacking
Well, I'm
this guy.
telling you, I didn't like it when Trump was unfairly maligned in that particular case. He wasn't even indicted on that, right?
I don't know. If Russia bought North St. Louis and built a Disneyland, we'd all be going right.
That's right.
No, come on.
Just not China.
In the
just
words
not
of Bill
Hawley-
McClellan, this is
Hawley
one of
be
those,
fired.
don't let the perfect be the
This
enemy of the
guy-
state.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Shatila, he's on YouTube. He's spouting the Russian talking points about Ukraine, even though Russia is bombing daycares and hospitals. It's really not that funny.
Oh, but I mean, has he?
We got to wrap up. Okay. I'm sorry. Unforgiving clock once again. Time to get to those letters and see what you had to say about last week's program. Jailed parents of truant kids. In Missouri, all parents have to do is say they're homeschooling their children, and there are no rules, no testing, no accountability. That from Mary Garrett of St. Peter's. Why are we happy to hear that reported crimes are decreasing? We can eliminate all crime if we simply quit answering all 911 calls. That from Everett Lewis of Richmond Heights. Presiding Judge Ed Spillane out of College Station, Texas wrote, longtime fan and listener in Texas, I'm usually on Ray's side, but not on the side of holding parents responsible for their truant children. I'm with everyone else. You can write us care of 9 PBS, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Don't forget those emails, Donnybrook at 9pbs.org, and those tweets. Use hashtag DonnybrookSTL and call the 9 line at 314-512-9094. Listen to us on your favorite podcast source, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and Google Play. That's it for the first half, but stay tuned because in just a moment, it's next up with St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell joining Bill and Wendy. Hope you join us. That's next.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.